Hi, we're back for Unit 3 for the last sticky note annotation, and this is Chapter 7, Module 23. In this module, we're going to talk about economic development, consumption, and sustainability. We talked a little bit about actually we talked a lot about sustainability in the beginning of the year with our ecological footprint and natural resources and all that stuff. So that's how we'll end this particular module. But first, we're going to talk about how demographic transition follows economic development. And so we have a theory. Here's a theory of demographic transition. So the theory states, and you need to know this, as a country moves from a subsistence economy to an industrialized and increased affluence, it undergoes a predictable shift in population growth. And it goes through population goes through 4 phases. So we're going to talk about those phases. And here is a graph showing you the 4 phases. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Birth rates, death rates, and population sizes. So you can get a sense for the death rate is plummeting, birth rates going down too, and the population is going up as we move through these 4 phases. So we're going to talk about these phases. Okay, phase 1 is a pre-industrial period, and it's characterized by high birth rates, high death rates. Okay, so phase 1 is a slow population growth phase. And the crude birth rate is equal to the crude death rate, which produces a steady population. But the thing is that it's because the high birth and high death rates kind of offset each other. So that's the kind of steady population that you're going to see in the phase 1. These are mostly pre-industrialized or pre-modern countries. So you have a lot of child labor, people having a lot of kids to help out on the farms or to work. The United States was actually in this particular phase before industrialization. You had high infant mortality rates, lack of health care, dangerous working conditions. So that's the slow population growth. Of course, did I say healthcare? Yeah. And no social security system. So parents count on the children to care for them as they age. Phase 2 is the rapid population growth, and we see this in industrializing countries. So in the early 20th century, the United States was in this phase. This was a phase where you have death rates declining and birth rates remaining high. This was because of better sanitation, clean drinking water, access to health care, vaccinations. People continue to have large families because it actually, that mindset of not having to have that large family to care for you or to work on the farm hadn't really set in yet. But that's actually an example of population momentum. That's when it doesn't catch up with the thinking. So this is where births outweigh the deaths. And we have India, which is in phase 2 of this particular demographic transition. The third stage is a stable population growth phase, where this is industrialized countries. We have stable population growth, but it's not for the same reasons as we talked about in phase 1. In this one, the crude birth rate falls and the crude death rate is falling as well, which makes them equal. So it's the opposite as the crude birth rate and the crude death rate rising. So we have the thing that characterizes this phase the most is that we have increased education and economical systems. So as income increases, people have fewer children. They have fewer children for several reasons. One is that they don't need them anymore for the labor or for caring for them because we have now the Social Security and the health care coming in. but also because they become a financial burden to the family. So we also have birth control in this. We see birth control in this phase, family planning. So this stable population growth is in a steady state of population. And then we have the phase 4, which is declining population growth. And we see that over here, right? Phase 4, declining population growth. So what does that mean? So it's post-industrial, and we have relatively high levels of affluence and economic development. Some countries that are in this phase now are Japan, Germany, Portugal, and Italy. There's fewer people and a higher proportion of elderly. Elderly live longer because of health care, and they have fewer children. They have fewer workers, increased social security costs, pension programs, insurance, and shortage of healthcare workers because of the elderly population. So we already talked about family planning, and that as a family income increases, people tend to have fewer children. There's definitely a link between higher levels of education and lower birth rates. And that is for many reasons, but the most important reason is that we have women delaying having children to finish their educations, and then delaying families because they're now in the workforce and having careers. And we also have older moms. So when you delay having children, then your reproductive capacity decreases because of your age. So you end up having less children. And then we have increased birth control as well. People choosing not to have children. So we're talking here about resource use, and the resource use obviously influences human impact on the earth. And this is where we already discussed that the size, how many people, the economic development, and their consumption influence the environment, right? So depending upon how much we use the resources, that's our ecological footprint. So population and wealth affect the environment. And of course, these are the most populous countries in the world. I wrote some of those down for you already. Look at the per capita ecological footprints. Australia being the highest, Haiti being the lowest. Many countries exceed the global average of 1.7, which is here. So these countries, including us, need to really start to rethink our use of resources. So we know that China is also going to increase their footprint in the coming years too because of their increase in population. The total impact of these 7.6 billion people is hard to appreciate, and it's really hard to even quantify. And these people, we are consuming large amounts of resources, and we have a negative impact on the systems. And some people live more lightly on the land, which could be intentional, or it could just be unintentional, meaning that you don't have access to certain technology or resources. So we have an equation here that helps us to visualize this. And it's really not a math equation. It's more of a theoretical, conceptual representation of these three major factors that I'm going to talk about. So the IPAT equation is the impact equals the population times the affluence times the technology. Some of them have a direct effect on impact, and some of them have a more indirect effect on impact. Population has a straightforward effect on impact. So, if you have two people, it's twice as much impact as one person, right? Because they're consuming more. So more people equal more impact. That's a direct relationship. Affluence is created by economic opportunity, and it doesn't necessarily have a simple relationship as population does. So we have the more affluent the country is, though, the greater the impact. And this depends on people's usage. So we have a family of four in the United States, owns 2 large sport utility vehicles, and lives in a spacious home, is going to use a much larger share of Earth's resources than a Bangladeshi family of 4 living in a 2-room apartment and traveling on bicycles. So the more affluent a society is, the more impact they have. And just so you know, the gross domestic product is the value of goods and services produced in 1 year in one country. You need to know that. That's just a term that is used to measure a nation's wealth. So please make sure you know that. So we talk here about global versus local impacts and urban impacts. So localized impacts are typical of rural agricultural-based societies, where global impacts are more industrialized societies. Okay, and then we're going to talk more here about urban impacts. So believe it or not, urban populations represent 1/2 of the human population. So that means that 1/2 of the human population lives in an urban environment. But those 50% are taking up 3/4 of the Earth's resources. So that's not really good, right? So there's a lot of environmental challenges with living in urban areas. These are the largest urban areas in the world. Just make sure you know some of them, maybe the tops and the bottoms, so you can know. But ranked 1 is Tokyo. These are the largest urban areas in the world. I wrote a few there for you. You can take a look at that. And then finishing up this chapter, talking about sustainability. It says here it's common if elusive goal. We talked about this with the ecological footprint in the beginning of the year and the tragedy of the commons, which I think we're going to go into a little bit more in another chapter soon. But sustainability, just know the definition. It's the ability to meet the current needs of a population without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their needs. Human actions, are straining Earth's natural capital and are stressing our ecosystems for future generations. And we need to work towards sustainability. Here's a case study here. You can read this. It's very nice. And I'm not going to ask you to answer any questions for this. So that's it, guys, for Unit 3, Populations.